Welcome back, guys. I am really excited for this one. This is going to be one of the more fun videos I put together, and it came from one of your questions. That question was, Adam, what do you do when you have a boring, gray, overcast day? And my answer was, you don't photograph what the scene looks like. You photograph what you can get back in Lightroom. So what I mean by that is, if the sunset is going off and it's got these intense colors in the sky, I know I need to underexpose that image because I know that back in Lightroom, I can pull out information from the dark parts, the shadows in the foreground, a lot easier than I can get overexposed information back. If I make that sky too bright, I'm not getting that detail back. That's just the way that camera technology works. So I shoot according to what I know I can get out of the image. And with that in mind, I'm going to show you 5 different ways that you can process a boring image and give it some really cool feelings. And you're just going to choose whichever one speaks to you and your style. But the important thing here is just by seeing all the different ways we can manipulate a photo and the light in the photo, you're going to start to go into the field knowing I don't need to worry about what this looks like exactly because I know what I can get when I get home. When I take this negative, this raw photo back, I know what I can pull out of it, the stories that I can tell. You're going to watch your photography transform the more that your toolkit is expanded and the more you're shooting with what you can achieve in mind. So with that, let's get into it. So we're going to start by processing what I call my style. And if you don't already know what your style is, that's okay. I have had the time and experience to identify mine. And the way I describe it, inspiring wanderlust through ethereal, evocative imagery. I want you to want to be in this moment. So when I capture a scene, I want you to want to be there. And I do that with a ethereal style, which means kind of soft and dreamlike, soft light, warm light tones, and evocative. I want it to bring out some emotion. So that's my personal style. If you don't know yours yet, that's okay. It develops over time. I'm going to have a little card linking up here somewhere that takes you to the 5 steps I always would do before starting to process an image. It takes you through the storytelling process, how to define your purpose, your intention with the photo. I'm going to do that out loud for you in this first example. What I love about the photo is just this little bit of light. It's otherwise very flat and very boring, but it's going to become dramatic. I shot with an idea in mind of bringing out this light substantially and making it feel like just this glorious winter drive through Iceland. With that being my intention, I'm going to start processing. First thing I'll do is get right into the local adjustments. I would usually do a balanced exposure first, but this is already a very balanced exposure, so I don't really feel like I need to do that. First thing I'm going to do is bring down this cloud bit here. I want to really darken that. Again, my concept is to get you focused on a burst of light through here. That's meant to be warm and welcoming and inviting and make it feel like a fun winter's drive. So to keep your focus in the middle where I want it, I'll do another graduated filter from the bottom up. This one's going to be a lot more gradual. So I'm going to really expand it and then drag it down so that it's a much softer gradient up into the light part. The next thing I'm going to do is I need to bring out this light. So I'm going to use a radial and I'm going to draw that around. So the cool thing about radials is it creates directional light. Wherever the middle is will be the most pronounced, and it will start to gradually fade as we come to the outside. And if you do it right, so for example here, it's going to look like the light source is coming from where this pin is, and it's going to be sort of a directional expanse outwards, which is what makes radial so cool. So I'm going to really boost the warmth of this, and I'm going to boost the white and the overall exposure a bit and make it look like a real light burst coming through there. Now obviously we don't want it on this side of the mountain. This doesn't make any sense for it to be here. So I'm going to use the brush tool and I'm just going to brush that out. If you aren't aware of what I'm doing with radials, I'm going to go ahead and have another link popping up in the corner here that shows you all the different ways that radial filters can be used to tell the story. I use radials more than almost any other feature of Lightroom, so I think that's a really good video for a lot of beginners to watch. But I'm going to go through it as if you've already seen it, and that way we can get into all the photos without taking up your entire day. So I'm just brushing all this out, and now that I'm looking at that with this part brushed out, I'm realizing that's maybe just a bit too warm, so I'm just going to start to dial that back. And I think about there looks good to me. Now, again, this is to my taste, so you can do this slightly differently. I'm going to darken just about half of this even more and really accentuate the drama and really get you invested in this moment that's going on as this car drives through this glorious light. With that same principle in mind, we're attracted to contrast. That can be contrast of light, brightness versus darkness, contrast to color, or it can be contrast of clarity. So what I mean by contrast to clarity is soft parts of the photo won't get as much attention as whatever's sharp. With that in mind, I'm going to actually increase the clarity and the texture in just this section of the road here, and that will help the viewer without consciously doing it. They will just get trapped in this moment that's occurring right here, and that's what I want. Looking at this, and I think the last thing I really need to do, this created the soft warm light we wanted. I'm going to soften that a bit, just lowering the clarity. And I'm going to now do the opposite. I'm going to bring another radial in that's going to be a bit wider, and it's going to be a bit of a vignette. So if this is where I want to hold you, I'm going to darken everything around this area. So I do that with another radial, I invert it, and I bring the exposure down on the outsides of the image. And depends, it's going to be very easy to overdo this. There's going to be somewhere that feels just right to me personally, and it might not be the exact spot you would have stopped. I think that looks good there. Now what I'm going to experiment with is also lowering the clarity of this of these outside areas, again with that idea of making sure the sharpest part of the image is right here, and I think that looks good. I'm wondering about the color. A lot of the times the last thing I do, contrast of colors and tones, is I cool the outsides and I leave the focal point warm. So I'm going to experiment with that in this case as well and see if I go really dramatic with it, how that looks. Definitely too much there, but I think maybe a subtle change to the temperature might work. So I'm just going to go somewhere around -7. So that would be the Atom edit. And then from here, I would go do a couple things just throughout the rest of this. I might bring the shadows up a smidge just so it's not quite as hard a contrast. I usually play with the highlights and the lights in this section here. And yeah, I think I like to boost the highlights a little bit. And I think that's it. For me, this would be a good spot to now start making some final adjustments. I might get rid of these cones here. I might take those out because I find them distracting and play with the tones of my orange or whatever. But this would be the overall mood that I'd be going for, and it would be a matter of fine-tuning from here. So I looked back at this photo after I had done some of the other styles, and I realized there was two things I had not done that I would usually do, and I wanted to go over that real quick. One of them is I've thrown this graduated filter on, just affecting the bottom of the image, and I've used my custom Glow 1 settings, which you can see here. If you want to copy those, that's fine. I use a preset that's called Glow 1, and it kind of gave a softer, more dreamlike feeling to the base. And I would usually do that across the whole image, but in this case, I only did it to the bottom because it was already bright and airy and dreamy enough. And the other change I made that I commonly make, not always, but often, is I added a little bit of pinks or reds to the highlights. It's a very subtle change, but I felt like those two additions were worth noting because it really transformed the image a bit and it made it feel more complete in my eyes. So I wanted to show that to you before we move on to the next one. So the next style I'm going to go through with you is what I would call the Nat Geo style, and that's a bit ambiguous. But generally speaking, Nat Geo tends to use a purist style, and that means not a lot of local adjustments, not a lot of curating or crafting light, but more global adjustments. Things like graduated filters for sure, but they don't do a ton to colors and to contrast and all that. They tend to leave the scene kind of as was. So I'm going to show you how to process this Moody Day with a bit of a Nat Geo style. It will be kind of similar. I definitely think this needs to get darkened a bit, but I won't be quite as heavy-handed with it. I'm going to now focus on basically minor contrast and global adjustments. So I'm going to bring the shadows down so that the road's a bit darker, and I'm going to bring the whites up so that the snow is a bit brighter. And the other thing they would really spend a lot of time with, generally speaking, is this tone curve here. So bringing up the lights, for example, and potentially up or down the shadows. I think in this case, bringing those down just a smidge. And that would be kind of it. Like the idea of a Nat Geo style is they don't want to create art or to blur that line between photography and art. It's really very simple, kind of pure. It's as shot in camera for the most part. Some will do a lot of time with the colors and the vibrancies and all that, but most of the shots you see tend to be, I would call them flat. I'm not a huge I'm not a huge fan of the Nat Geo style, but the purists out there tend to prefer it, and I think this would be about all they do. Potentially playing with the white balance as well. I can see this being warmed or cooled based on what mood they were going for, what the headline of the article was. Cold winter days, then it would be cooled. Winter magic in Iceland, then it would be warmed. But in any event, it would be pretty subtle changes and just something kind of similar to this, very basic. So when I say an Ansel Adams style, I'm going to do a traditional black and white heavy contrast style, which is what Ansel was kind of known for. He was also the father of landscape photography, but he's the one that invented dodging and burning, which was using individual brushstrokes to make brighter and darker points of contrast where he wanted the viewer to sort of begin and end their journey. So with that in mind, I think the first thing Mr. Adams would do is the same thing that I did in mine, and that is bring down the exposure here and really create some drama in the skies, and also help focus your attention on the journey. So the journey, I should go ahead and clarify. There's a couple different ways. Mine was a soft ethereal dreamlike drive, and I focused on this area, but I think Ansel would have more of a visual journey through the image. And what I mean by that is you'd follow this leading line all the way to the car, and then you'd engage with this part of the scene. Now, I'm guessing at what he would do based on having read his books and studied his work a bit. I'm going to go ahead and do it in the way that I think he would. So that starts with a dark, dramatic sky, and probably going to play with the tone curve next and bring out the snow and the brights. Yeah, definitely doing that. And in fact, now that I've brightened things a bit, I'm coming back up to this graduated filter. I'm going to increase the contrast and just deepen everything up here. And I think that looks fine to me. Similarly, I'm going to do one across the bottom. If you think his style is already looking a lot like mine, it's because I studied his, and a lot of my inspiration came from Ansel Adams. So I think we have a similar style, though I have some more modern tools available to me. In my opinion, the next thing he would do is start his dodging and burning. So I'm going to use the brush for that. And with the auto mask turned on and the flow pretty low, I'm going to get a nice big brush and I'm going to paint along these lines, because I think he would want your journey to start with these leading lines and then come through the image all the way to the car. So that's sort of the visual journey I'm going for here. And let's see how I do with this very clumsy brushing. If I increase the exposure a bit, didn't really get the road lines like I wanted just yet. So I'm going to keep kind of painting in here until I think it's grabbing. I know that the leading lines are already a bit grabbing, but I want to really bring those out in contrast to the snow and the black. So keep brushing along here until I think it looks about right, and playing with the exposure until I think you're grabbed. And that feels about right to me. This one's still just a smidge too dark. What I'm looking for is just that point where it's brighter than anything else, noticeably, but not forcibly, if that makes sense. I want you to notice it's brighter, but not in a way that makes it look unnatural, just in a way that your eyes are drawn to it. And I think that's about right. I think we're already well on the way. I'm going to add a bit of clarity to the image overall. I know he always had a very contrast-heavy style, and separating the midtones is what the clarity does, and that creates a bit more contrast in your midtones and brings a bit of drama to the image, which his tended to be. A bit less dreamlike and a bit more dramatic. And potentially what he would do, what I'm going to try doing is, similarly, though he didn't have radial filters available, he did a lot of brushing, the dodging and burning using the brush. So I'm going to brush this area here with a very soft, very feathered brush. And same concept, though, of just finishing the user journey in a spot that's a bit brighter. And I think doing it this way should achieve that goal, potentially even in the mountains, to kind of create that soft light coming through. So in this case, what I'm going to do is a heavier feather. I'm going to get a new brush, actually. Heavier flow, a really big feather, and I'm going to just sort of paint this light. And just like what I did with the radial for mine, but with a more, I guess, old school method of painting soft light in here. Lower the clarity of that. And I think that looks pretty good. Borders on grungy. There's a very clear visual journey, and the black and white tones are effective in creating drama and contrast, and just focusing on those tones. And the journey itself is what we would strive for in his style. The next style we're going to go through is kind of common on Instagram these days and on social media, and it kind of has to be because you're competing with so many photos at heavy saturation and like unbelievably soft lighting has kind of become a trend, and it's effective in catching attention in just a thumbnail. You need dramatic thumbnails that pop. So I'm going to be doing what I would call the max drive style, and it's actually kind of common on Instagram for a lot of people to do. It's deeply saturated colors, very soft light. I think it would be similar to mine, but just a bit more heavy-handed. So the same way we did mine, mine, I know Max would do a ton of soft light here. He would just basically everything I did exaggerated by even more. Let's start off with a pretty subtle one and a bit of exposure. And that looks about right. I'm guessing really lowering the clarity and adding a bit of haze even to it to create that atmospheric glow. And then where the light's coming out, a lot of the times you'll actually replicate that the sun itself is there. So we'll do that with a second one and then increase exposure even more and really create that sun glow. So what I need to do is brush out these parts that shouldn't be receiving that light from both of my radials. I probably should have done that while I was in it the first time, but that's all right. This is an easy fix. I'm going to increase my flow on this so it doesn't take so many brush strokes to get this done. And keeping all of the attention in that same spot that we have in the other photos, and the part that makes sense, because it wouldn't make sense to have a lot of light and color up on this mountain ridge. It would be blocking the sun on this side of it, so that wouldn't make any sense at all. And that's how I would start it. And then similarly to what I did, another radial filter here, and we're really going to go heavy on the contrast on the inside and outside. So we're going to vignette the crap out of this thing. We can do that with lowering the exposure by quite a bit. And I'm going to go way overkill and then work my way backwards with this style. So let's bring this down to the center and expand it a little bit more and feather a bit more aggressively. So the same principle. Your journey is going to be all here. You're not going to follow it quite so much inward. You're just going to start and end in the spot. And the reason that's effective for Instagram and for grids is because thumbnail tends to be only a small section of the photo. So you need the attention to all be in that one section. And I think, honestly, he would have gone even more heavy-handed in all of these regards. So I'm going to lift the exposure even a little bit more, come back into here, and kind of just continue doing what I'm doing a bit more aggressively until I feel like basically it's overdone. And that's it. And that's the point that a lot of them would stop. This isn't meant to be a criticism. This is meant to be kind of a stylistic analysis, which a lot of this is what I've implemented into my style as well. I just tend to go a bit lighter on it. So the blue should be almost down to a black. The colors in here look good to me. I think we'll come down to the tone curve and, as always, boost the lights a bit. There we go. The fact that this is blowing out is actually, hasn't actually blown out yet, but it should. It usually will with their style. It'll be a very soft light, usually a very soft, warm light. And man, I'm surprised this isn't blown out yet, but all right. Next thing I'm going to do is pump in a bunch of color saturation. Now, most people, I imagine, would do that with the vibrance slider, and we can try it with that. And maybe that's what most people would use, including him. That creates the blues in the snow and accentuates the orange here. That natural cold to warm contrast is really sought after. So you can do it with the vibrance for sure in this case. I tend to use the blue primary and just jack it up if that's what we're going for. I'm going to go even more. I'm going to go all the way to 100 and see how that looks. No, let's go partially blue and a bit more vibrance. And I think this is about what to expect from that style. Now, this might be too much, or this might be really cool to you. Again, this is where you're going to have to form your preferences. But what this does a very effective job of is if I crop this down to just a thumbnail, I'm going to make this a square. It just looks dramatic. And that's what you need. You need one section to have a lot of catch, a lot of, you want to stop people in their scroll, put it that way. And that's it. That would be, I think, all they would do for the Max Rive, heavy-handed, truly dramatic Instagram style. The last technique I'm going to go through with you is less of a style and more of a technique, and I call it color popping. I'm sure there's probably a different industry term for it, but that's what I call it. And this is commonly used by either Instagrammers who are trying to curate their feeds or their galleries to have a certain color mold, or by graphic designers who are working with a client whose brand has a certain color ethos in mind. So as an example, Coca-Cola has its own shade of red, and they might use this technique to make sure that that red is sort of in line with their branding colors. So I'm going to go with a pinkish red on this one because that's kind of a common color. And the idea is pretty simple. You'd want to desaturate all but one color. You can kind of keep colors along a certain tone. So for example, in this image, we have a lot of blue. I'm going to desaturate that by quite a bit. There is no purple or magenta. I mean, I can drag them down. It won't affect anything. There's no aqua. There's no green. Usually there will be a few more colors, and you would want to desaturate those as well. And, maybe not all the way, but definitely quite a bit. But then like the warm tones, the orange, reds, and yellows, you could potentially desaturate some of those as well, but you're less concerned with those and more concerned with the opposite colors, the complementary colors. So in this case, we do have a bit of yellow and maybe a bit of orange. If anything, I'm going to boost that. And I think the best way to bring that out a bit is to come back to this radial filter and just add a bit more warmth to it and just give that a bit more glow. So the idea is now I'm going to give it a pink color pop, and I do that by coming down to the split toning, and in the highlights, I'm just going to boost the saturation, and this first one is by default like a pinkish red, and I'm going to really jack that up, I think about there. And what you can see has happened is it sort of infused the whole image with this pinkish red, and so the yellow has turned to kind of a nice glowing orange, the snow has turned to sort of a pinkish red, there's still some nice golden sunlight here, so that color worked pretty well. But let's say that you needed a cooler tone. Let's say that teal was the color you were trying to curate your feed to appear. With this image, it would work just fine. Most images it will, because we've desaturated all the colors that wouldn't work. So now the snow kind of takes on the teal, the light kind of takes on the teal. You might need to play with your temperature within this section here, because it's turned a pretty obscure shade of green, which doesn't make a lot of sense, but even that might not matter. It depends on what your objective is. And again, you could come down, you could curate it for a green or like a yellow, whatever you thought either looked nice or what you were trying to curate your feed to feel like. So this is it's actually kind of a fun technique. It's definitely more creative. I wouldn't call this photorealism. If anything, I'd call it photo surrealism. But it's neat to know, and as you can see, it's got a pretty neat effect. I actually really like that. That wouldn't be what I put up in a gallery, but I would potentially use that just for something creative and fun. I think that looks pretty cool and definitely very different from the other edits. So I just wanted to go through that technique with you guys, in large part because the split toning tool is extremely powerful and often neglected, but it can really transform the mood of an image. Guys, I hope you found it as fun as I did. I get a lot of fulfillment out of challenging myself creatively and trying different methods and all that. So I don't know, I enjoyed this video a lot, and I hope you did too. I hope you got two things out of it. First, I hope you got the idea that you can transform an image to become your own, and that you need to start shooting with that in mind. Not with, here's how the scene is, I'm going to replicate the scene, but here's how the scene was, here's how I'm going to make you feel, here's how I'm going to make it mine, here's what I'm going to do artistically to craft an image that is unique to my experience and to what I want you to perceive. So I hope you got that, and I hope you also understood there is no right or wrong, that it's all creativity. The only way you can be wrong when you process your photo, that you can do something wrong, is if it doesn't match what you set out to do. If you wanted it to be soft and inviting and you made it dark and dramatic, then you've gone wrong, then you failed. But not because the photo isn't good, but because you didn't achieve your goal. So I hope that was eye-opening. I hope it was fun. I hope it was all those things. And I hope you'll comment. I hope you'll message, because just like this video, this came from one of your messages. So find me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, wherever. I'm on all of them. Adam Marland, We Own the Moment. Those are my two handles. And I'm going to keep making videos just for you guys. So let me know what you want to see next. And I will catch you on the next one.